All right, this is Matthew chapter 12. Really interesting passage. You can have some fun with this. The title of the message the lesson is Legalism. And, that conjures up all kinds of ideas in people's minds, like hairstyles, clothing issues, etc. And I'm just going to say this. While those could be issues of legalism, they're not in and of themselves legalism. Standards and legalism are not the same thing, and I wish I had time to really expound on that, but people act as if they are. And so I think it's really important that you don't let this class get away from you, and I wouldn't start off asking people about what they think legalism is or getting any discussion. I wouldn't have any discussion at the beginning of your class, because otherwise you're going to be derailed and not go through the passage. Deal with it at the end or towards the end. Here's what I would start off with. Have you ever wondered why Jesus healed so often on the Sabbath, when the Sabbath was a pivotal observance in the law? So much so that it was Old Testament Israel's failure to observe the Sabbath that was the basis of their 70-year captivity in Babylon. Leviticus 26, 34, 35. So then the land shall enjoy its Sabbaths as long as it lies desolate while you are in your enemy's land. Then the land shall rest and enjoy its Sabbaths. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, the rest that it did not have on your Sabbaths when you were dwelling in it. So it was very much the Sabbath, lack of Sabbath observance that had a huge part in their captivity. So why did Jesus continually do this? He knew it was going to cause problems. Well, I think this passage helps us understand Jesus' motive, because it demonstrates, first of all, by him doing this, it demonstrates how far they had corrupted the law by the hundreds, if not thousands, of traditions that they had added to it. Secondly, he's trying to bring in the point that he brings in this passage, that he alone is the truth, and therefore the one who accurately understands what the law is all about. So when he was doing things on the Sabbath, he wasn't breaking the law. Jesus never broke the law. He'd be a sinner if he broke the law. The Bible tells us in Matthew 5:17, he didn't come to destroy the law, but to fulfill it. So what he was consistently doing was breaking their traditions that they had made equal with the law. Matthew 15, verse 8 and 9 says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrine the commandments of men." You should definitely have that passage in your lesson, because that's really what's at stake here. These traditions were actually written in books or commentaries like the Talmud and the Mishnah. One section alone of the Talmud has 24 chapters dealing with Sabbath laws. Now, keep in mind, these are man's laws, the Pharisees' laws, not God's laws. You don't have 24 chapters in the Bible dealing with Sabbath laws. But the rabbis had initially come up with these laws or traditions in order to protect people from breaking the law, but eventually they became, in their minds, the law themselves. And a lot of them are really wacky. Like, for example, you could only travel 3,000 feet from your house on the Sabbath day. However, if you put some food down at the 3,000 foot mark and ate it, that was considered an extension of your house. Then you could go 3,000 feet more. So they had all these wacky ways to get around their own traditions, their own laws, and they had lots of weird ones. Baths could not be taken on the Sabbath out of fear that the water would splash on the floor, and that would be equal to washing the floor, which would be work. So when they accused Jesus of breaking the law, he was really not breaking anything other than their traditions, which is why he did this so often. He's trying to show them that they had completely corrupted the law. And verse 1, as your curriculum tells you, the disciples were doing what is normal. When they walked through the grain fields, they weren't trampling on people's property. They were walking in these little paths that were designed for getting through the fields to other parts, to other places. It's not like they had a great intricate road system. They had main roads, but they didn't have ways to get around the community, if you will, as easily. And all that the Mosaic law forbid was the harvesting of grain. Exodus 34:21. 6 days you shall work, but on the seventh day you shall rest. In plowing time and in harvest you shall rest. Well, grabbing a stalk of corn and eating it because you're hungry on your way through the fields is not harvesting. It's not what the law was talking about. In fact, it was completely legal and stated such in the law. Deuteronomy 23:25. If you go into your neighbor's standing grain, you may pluck the ears with your hand, but you shall not put a sickle to your neighbor's standing grain. So you could pluck the ears like they were doing, but you couldn't put a sickle to it. That would be harvesting. So all these traditions of weird prohibitions, really, there were so many of them and so crazy that they actually turned the Sabbath day, instead of it being a day of rest, they turned it into a day of stress. It was like more work to keep the Sabbath than instead of being a restful time. So maybe a discussion question, this is where you're going to slip into maybe some discussions that talk about kind of legalistic ideas, but what would be a modern day example of man-made traditions that get applied as biblical truths? And I'll just throw that out there as a question. I'm not going to bother trying to answer it. Verse 3 and 4, how should we understand Jesus' use of David eating the showbread, which didn't break a man-made tradition, but actually was unlawful? Jesus called it unlawful. Have you not read what David did when he became hungry, he and his companions? How he entered the house of God, and they ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those with him, but for the priests alone. So this is really interesting, right? Because this is something that David did that was unlawful, and yet Jesus is using it as an example of the principle he's really about to lay out, like in verse 7, that he desires compassion, not sacrifice. So basically what he's saying is, and he'll also say in verse 8, as the Lord of the Sabbath, I know what that Sabbath rest is really all about, and I know what all these laws are about. But if someone's in need, you don't not meet their need by throwing up one of the laws. The laws are there to teach you how to love God and how to love man, not how to hurt man. And so basically Jesus is saying that he, as the one who created the law, understood that there were times when you would make exceptions. Another statement Jesus makes along with that is, that was laws about the temple, but someone greater than the temple is here. Jesus made two statements that really rocked them and got them as upset as they did. It wasn't just them getting upset because he healed a man, but he said, I'm greater than the temple. Then in verse 8, I'm greater than the Sabbath. Two like monumental things within Judaism and that they would idolize. And he's saying, hey, I'm greater than them. I'm the one that decides what can happen and what can't happen in the temple. I'm the one that decides what can happen and not happen on Sabbath. Then in verses 10 through 14, he's going to provide a living illustration of those realities by healing the man with the withered hand. So in verses 10 through 14, he heals the man with the withered hand, and they ask him the question in verse 10, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And again, behind that question are all these traditions they had. They had taken that idea to mean you couldn't give medicine on the Sabbath, you couldn't help anybody physically with any kind of sickness problems in any way, not just miraculous healing. We're talking about take them to the doctor or give them medicine, unless that person was about to die and doing something for them would keep them from dying. Jesus healing the man with the withered hand, man with the withered hand wasn't about to die. So all of that kind of lies behind that question. But then again, all that is tradition, the idea of not being able to heal, not being able to provide medicine, etc. And Jesus countered with the same principle of doing what is compassionate or good. Wouldn't you help someone, get their ox out of the ditch or whatever, if it happens on the Sabbath, which they would do. So as your curriculum talks about, he kind of backed them in the corner. But here's another reality. Jesus didn't do anything. He rarely ever, and he certainly didn't in this case, physically do anything to heal him. He just spoke the word. He just told him to stretch out your hand. That's not work. He's just speaking. So it's funny how they got so upset about him breaking the Sabbath when he didn't break the Sabbath. And they're not interested in knowing the truth. They're only interested in attacking him and accusing him. And really this chapter is kind of a major turning point in the book of Matthew and in the life of Christ. So they go from being upset with him, angry with him, to now they're plotting for his death. Verse 14. They conspired against him as how they might destroy him. And Mark's gospel, in Mark, where's the reference? 3:6, that conspiracy included the Herodians, who are enemies of the Pharisees generally. They didn't like each other. They didn't deal with each other. But now they're becoming unified over a desire to get rid of Christ. So what is legalism? Is a church that asks their people to dress a certain way necessarily legalism? Schools that have stricter rules about what their students should or shouldn't do, like Christian schools, does that make them legalistic? No, it really doesn't. And I think we've lost sight of that. What legalism is, I'm going to give you a simple Glenn Hugin definition. Legalism is judging or basing someone's spirituality based on outward acts, standards, or other appearances. So, if you're going to, which often happens, decide that someone's less spiritual than you because they don't dress a certain way, or in a school situation, for example, our Christian school in Tennessee, we were pretty laid back compared to most of the schools in our association. And so I know that we were kind of looked down upon at times. That's where the legalism comes in. When you look at someone's standards and they're different than yours, and then you judge their heart. That is what legalism is. But just having a different view, someone, for whatever reason has a different standard than you, and maybe in your mind it's stricter, that doesn't make them legalistic. We can be legalistic when we're less strict, because it's the heart attitude, and that's the whole point. It's not the outward things, it's what's in the heart that determines a person's spirituality. So I hope all this helps, and I hope you have a great class, and I'll see you on Sunday.